Have you ever found yourself scrolling through social media, comparing your life to someone else's perfect image? Maybe it's a colleague flaunting their new success, or an influencer with a flawless lifestyle. You pause, you question, why can't I be more like that? What's wrong with me? The trap of comparison is powerful, and it often leads to feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, and anxiety. It's not just about images or status updates, but about something deeper. The constant pressure to measure up. In a world where external validation seems like the key to success and happiness, how do you find true confidence without falling victim to this cycle? It's not enough to simply be yourself anymore. This requires a deep understanding of who you are and what drives you. But where do you even start? Stoic philosophy offers timeless wisdom on overcoming these challenges. From focusing on what you can control to learning how to shift your mindset, Stoicism provides practical tools to reclaim your power. In today's world of social media distractions, toxic relationships, and self-doubt, can Stoicism be the key to unlocking your true potential? If you're tired of feeling stuck and ready to take back control, this video is for you. Stick with us as we explore actionable insights rooted in ancient wisdom, backed by modern science, that will help you break free from the traps holding you back. Like this video? Subscribe to Stoic Narratives Official for more on mastering your mindset and achieving lasting growth. Number 1. The social media trap, escaping the comparison cycle. In today's digital world, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the constant flood of images and updates that fill our social media feeds. A man spends just a few minutes scrolling and suddenly he feels like his life is lacking. His friends seem to be traveling the world, securing new jobs, or posting about their perfect relationships. Meanwhile, he feels stuck, like he's not measuring up. This constant comparison has become the norm, yet it's quietly damaging to our sense of self-worth. How did we get here? And more importantly, how did we escape? The social media trap is not about the platforms themselves, but about the mindset they promote. We're constantly exposed to carefully curated snippets of other people's lives, making it easy to fall into the trap of comparing ourselves to unrealistic standards. These images are not the full story. They're the highlight reel, with all the imperfections edited out. Yet it's hard to see this when we're deep in the comparison cycle. We begin to measure our worth against the success, wealth, or happiness of others, ignoring the fact that what we see is often a filtered version of reality. Stoic philosophy teaches us a powerful lesson here. Focus on controlling what you can and let go of what you cannot. Epictetus, one of the greatest Stoic philosophers, emphasized that we cannot control the actions of others or the external world, but we can control our perception of them. So, when we're hit with feelings of inadequacy from scrolling through social media, it's not the posts themselves that cause harm. It's how we choose to interpret them. Do we let these fleeting images dictate our happiness? Or do we take a step back and realize that our self-worth is not defined by someone else's highlight reel? This Stoic wisdom invites us to shift our mindset and detach from the need for external validation. Instead of measuring our progress against the lives of others, we can choose to measure our growth, one that aligns with our values and goals. For example, a woman might scroll through Instagram and see a peer celebrating her professional achievements. While the natural impulse might be to feel less than, the Stoic response would be to focus on her own journey, acknowledging her unique path and the progress she has made. The next step is to take action. Stoicism isn't about just accepting reality passively, it's about actively shaping our responses to it. One way to break free from the comparison trap is to limit exposure to the perfect versions of others' lives. This doesn't mean abandoning social media altogether, but rather setting healthy boundaries. It might involve unfollowing accounts that evoke negative feelings, or simply taking breaks from endless scrolling. Another important tool is practicing gratitude. By focusing on what we have and acknowledging our progress, we can shift the focus away from external comparisons and toward internal growth. For instance, taking a moment each day to reflect on 3 things we are grateful for can reframe our mindset, helping us appreciate our own journey rather than focusing on what others are doing. Social media, in all its interconnectedness, has the power to shape our perceptions, but it doesn't have to define us. By applying Stoic principles to our online interactions, we can regain control over our self-worth and avoid being trapped by the comparison cycle. The next time you catch yourself feeling inferior after scrolling, pause and ask yourself, how can I detach from this need for external validation and refocus on my growth and progress? This is where the power of Stoic philosophy can truly transform our lives. Rather than getting caught up in the noise of external comparisons, we learn to embrace our own story, define our success, and take deliberate steps toward the life we want to build, on our terms. So the question is, what would happen if you stopped comparing your journey to someone else's and instead focused on making progress in your own life? Number 2. Fear of failure, redefining success in a competitive world. When faced with a challenge, how often do we find ourselves paralyzed by the fear of failure? A man, eager to start his own business, spends sleepless nights crafting the perfect plan. But as he takes the first steps, doubt creeps in. What if he fails? What if people laugh at him? What if he loses everything? The thought of failure can be so overwhelming that it often keeps us from even trying. Sound familiar? If you've ever hesitated to take a leap because you were afraid of falling short, you're not alone. In today's competitive world, the fear of failure is one of the most common roadblocks we face. The truth is that failure is often seen as a personal flaw, something to be avoided at all costs. But here's where Stoic philosophy offers a different perspective. Instead of viewing failure as a disaster, the Stoics saw it as a necessary part of the journey to success. Seneca, one of the great Stoic philosophers, famously said, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult." In other words, the fear of failure makes the task seem harder than it really is. When we view failure as something to be feared, we become too scared to try, and the cycle of inaction continues. This is where Stoicism can help us redefine success. According to the Stoics, success is not about avoiding failure or accumulating external achievements. It's about living in accordance with virtue, pursuing what aligns with our values, and learning from each experience, whether it's a success or a failure. For example, a woman might attempt to launch a creative project, only to see it flop. Instead of beating herself up or abandoning her dream, a Stoic approach would encourage her to reflect on the lessons learned, adjust her approach, and try again. The failure itself isn't the problem. It's the failure to learn from it that hinders growth. So why are we so afraid to fail? Part of it comes from our desire for external validation. In a world that constantly measures success by visible achievements, we often tie our self-worth to our accomplishments. But as Stoics understand, the true measure of success is not external, it's internal. It's about how we respond to challenges and setbacks. When we shift our focus from the fear of failure to the pursuit of wisdom, we can approach challenges with a sense of curiosity and resilience rather than dread. The Stoics also emphasize that the only real failure is the failure to act with integrity or to give up on our principles. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Rather than seeing obstacles as roadblocks, Stoicism teaches us to view them as opportunities for growth. If we are afraid of failing, we are, in essence, letting that fear stand in our way. But when we embrace the idea that failure is just another step in the learning process, we can take more risks and make bolder decisions. Take a moment and reflect. How many times have you hesitated to act because of the fear of what might go wrong? And how many times has that fear turned out to be worse than the reality of the situation? Maybe the failure you feared wasn't as catastrophic as you imagined. Maybe it was the very thing you needed to push you forward. In a world that often pressures us to avoid failure at all costs, Stoicism offers a refreshing perspective. Failure is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced as a teacher. If we shift our mindset to see each failure as a valuable lesson, we free ourselves from the paralyzing grip of fear and open the door to growth, resilience, and success. So how will you approach your next challenge? Will you let the fear of failure hold you back, or will you embrace it as an opportunity to learn, grow, and ultimately succeed? The choice is yours, and with Stoic wisdom, you can redefine what success really means. Number 3. Toxic relationships. Safeguard your confidence from negativity. A woman had been friends with someone for years, sharing laughs, stories, and countless memories. But over time, she began to notice a shift. Her friends' comments started to sting more than they used to. Subtle jabs about her appearance, criticisms of her choices, and remarks that seemed harmless at first slowly wore her down. The more she tried to brush it off, the more she felt like something was off. Her once confident, positive self started slipping into self-doubt, and she found herself questioning her worth. Sound familiar? We've all been there, haven't we? Toxic relationships, whether they're romantic, familial, or friendships, can drain the life out of you, often without you even realizing it. At first, it's easy to dismiss those little comments or behaviors, but over time, the cumulative effect of negativity takes its toll. The Stoics understood the power of external influences on our internal state. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, noted, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This insight is essential when we are dealing with toxic people. The key is to recognize that while we cannot control the negativity others bring, we can control how we respond to it. Let's take a moment to break this down. A man might have a coworker who constantly belittles his ideas, making snide remarks every time he speaks up in a meeting. At first, he might try to brush it off, thinking it's just a one-time thing. But over time, he starts to second-guess himself, questioning his capabilities. This is the essence of a toxic relationship, the slow erosion of confidence and self-esteem. So, how can we safeguard our sense of self in the face of negativity? The Stoics believe that true confidence comes from within, not from the approval or validation of others. Epictetus, another great Stoic philosopher, reminded us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it, that matters. When you begin to see toxic behavior for what it is, a reflection of someone else's insecurity or bitterness, you stop internalizing it. You don't take it personally. Imagine you're like a shield. You can let the arrows of negativity bounce off without leaving a mark. But let's be honest, it's not always that easy. We are social beings, and it's natural to care about what others think of us. Still, the Stoic approach teaches us that we have the power to choose our responses. If someone's words or actions make you feel small, instead of questioning your worth, ask yourself, why should I let someone else's negativity define my reality? This shift in mindset is powerful. It's not about ignoring the toxicity, but about choosing not to let it take root in your mind. Here's where it gets a bit tricky. Sometimes, the toxic people in our lives are those we love the most. A parent who constantly criticizes, a partner who undermines your confidence, or a close friend who always turns the conversation back to themselves can be hard to confront. But the Stoics would remind us that we must set boundaries to protect our peace of mind. In fact, they'd say it's our duty to safeguard our inner tranquility from harmful influences. If you're wondering how to do this, think of it like putting on armor. You don't have to engage with every negative comment. In fact, the Stoic principle of apatheia, freedom from destructive emotions, teaches us to detach from the need for approval. We don't need to fight every battle. Sometimes, the best way to handle a toxic person is to quietly withdraw from their influence. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a powerful act of self-preservation. Now, I want you to think about your own life. Are there relationships that chip away at your confidence, leaving you feeling drained or undervalued? How do you respond when someone undermines you? Do you internalize their negativity, or do you remind yourself that their words don't define you? The Stoic lesson here is simple. We cannot control the actions of others, but we can choose how we respond. If you start to recognize toxic relationships for what they are and create emotional boundaries, you'll find that your confidence grows stronger, not weaker. So next time you face a toxic person, remember that you have the power to protect your peace. It's your mind, your emotions, and your confidence. Don't let anyone take that away. The question is, how will you choose to guard your inner peace today? Will you let the negativity of others define you, or will you embrace your Stoic strength and rise above it? Number 4. Negative self-talk, transforming your inner critic. A man was sitting at his desk staring at the screen, his fingers poised above the keyboard. But no matter how hard he tried, the words just wouldn't come. He had a deadline looming, And yet, he couldn't shake the nagging voice in his head telling him, "You're not good enough for this job. What if they find out you're not as skilled as they think?" With every passing minute, that inner voice grew louder, drowning out his ability to focus or produce. Sound familiar? It's the voice of negative self-talk, the harsh, relentless inner critic that often shows up when we need it the least. The thing is, we all have it. Whether it's about our career, relationships, or personal abilities, that inner critic loves to highlight our flaws, mistakes, and perceived shortcomings. But how many times has that voice actually helped you? Chances are it hasn't. In fact, it's more likely to hold you back than propel you forward. The Stoics were keenly aware of this destructive force. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." In other words, the more we let negative thoughts shape our inner world, the more our reality becomes tainted by them. So, how can we transform that inner critic into something more constructive? Take the man, for example. Instead of succumbing to the inner voice that whispered failure, he could choose to challenge it. The Stoics emphasized the power of perception. The way we interpret our experiences can determine whether they empower us or drag us down. So the man could stop hearing, "You're not good enough," and replace it with, "I'm still learning and improving. I've faced challenges before, and I can handle this too." By shifting the narrative, he begins to take control of the situation, rather than being controlled by it. Why do we let that inner critic have so much power? It's easy to forget that we're in charge of our own thoughts. Negative self-talk often comes from our fear of failure or desire for perfection. But why is perfection the goal? The Stoics weren't focused on being perfect. They focused on progress. They understood that growth comes from learning through adversity, not avoiding it. So, how do we break free from the cycle of negative self-talk? The first step is awareness. Recognize when that critical voice starts speaking up. Is it after a mistake, a difficult task, or when you're trying something new? Once you notice it, pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself, is this true? Does this thought serve me, or is it just a roadblock to my success? Here's the tricky part. Most of us are so used to these self-critical thoughts that we don't even question them. But if we want to grow, we must learn to challenge them. A woman, for example, might constantly tell herself that she's not good enough to take on a leadership role. But when she stops to reflect, she might realize that these beliefs stem from past failures, ones that have nothing to do with her current abilities. By rejecting that limiting belief, she frees herself to take on new challenges and embrace opportunities she once feared. The Stoic principle of amor fati, or love of fate, is key here. Instead of fearing mistakes or failures, we learn to embrace them. Each stumble is simply a lesson in disguise. So, when that inner critic tells you that you're not good enough or that you'll fail, remind yourself that failure is not the end. It's an opportunity to learn, grow, and improve. And let's be real, sometimes that inner critic can be downright ridiculous, right? It'll tell you you're not worthy of success or that you're bound to make a fool of yourself. But instead of listening, laugh at it. Yes, laugh. Realize how absurd it is to let a voice in your head dictate your potential. So, next time you're facing that familiar self-doubt, pause and ask yourself, why am I letting this voice control me? How can I reframe this to serve my growth? Negative self-talk doesn't have to dictate your life. It's time to take control and change the narrative. What would your life look like if you could quiet that inner critic and replace it with encouragement? What if every mistake was just another opportunity to improve? Number 5. Digital distractions, finding focus in a noisy world. A woman sat down to finish a report she had been working on all week. The deadline was closing in, and she could feel the pressure mounting. She opened her laptop, ready to dive in, only to find herself scrolling through her social media feeds without even realizing how much time had passed. Notifications pinged on her phone, and before she knew it, an hour had slipped away, gone in a blur of distractions. Why is it so hard to focus? She thought. The world seemed louder and more demanding than ever before. Sound familiar? Digital distractions are everywhere, constantly vying for our attention, breaking our focus, and stealing our time. It's as if we live in a constant stream of noise. Every beep, every notification, every new message feels urgent. But is it really? How many times have we checked our phones for no reason at all, only to find ourselves wasting precious minutes, or even hours, on things that don't add any real value to our lives? The Stoics, however, had a different perspective. They understood that the world would always be filled with distractions. Yet, they also knew that we have the power to control where we direct our attention. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, reminds us that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This idea is as relevant today as it was in ancient Rome. In a world full of digital noise, we still have the ability to choose how we respond. So how do we escape the grip of these distractions and reclaim our focus? The first step is simple, yet often difficult: awareness. It's about noticing when we're slipping into autopilot mode, when we're mindlessly scrolling or jumping between apps. One way to break this cycle is by setting boundaries for ourselves. Instead of allowing social media or constant notifications to interrupt our day, we can decide to limit our exposure. For example, she could set specific times when she checks her messages or email, rather than letting them hijack her every moment. But it's not just about the digital world. Distractions are anything that pulls us away from what matters most. Our thoughts, our habits, the noise in the environment, anything that prevents us from focusing on the task at hand. The Stoics recognized this challenge and practiced mindfulness in their daily lives. They sought to be fully present in whatever they were doing, whether it was a conversation, a task, or even just a quiet moment of reflection. This practice of mindfulness is a way to combat the constant distractions of the modern world. Take a moment to reflect. Have you ever caught yourself in the middle of something important, only to realize you've been distracted by a dozen unrelated thoughts or notifications? It's like being in a meeting and thinking about what's for dinner. Your mind wanders, and suddenly you're no longer present. The Stoics knew that distractions are inevitable, but they also knew that we could choose how much power they hold over us. Epictetus, another Stoic philosopher, taught that wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. This idea extends beyond material wealth. It's about minimizing distractions, reducing the noise, and focusing on what truly matters. So, the woman who kept checking her phone could choose to focus on the task at hand, remind herself of the importance of her work, and find her clarity amidst the distractions. Of course, we don't live in a vacuum. The digital world isn't going anywhere, but it's within our power to reshape our relationship with it. Ask yourself, what is the cost of giving in to distractions? What's the price of losing focus on what truly matters? And how can you reclaim your attention to achieve greater clarity and productivity in your own life? The next time you sit down to focus, whether it's on a project, a conversation, or simply being present with yourself, ask, are you really giving your full attention, or are you letting the noise of the world take over? The Stoics remind us that true peace comes when we learn to control our focus, not just our actions. Will you take control today? Number 6. Procrastination, breaking the cycle of inaction. A man sat at his desk, staring at the to-do list that seemed to stretch on forever. Each item was important, yet none of them felt urgent enough to tackle right away. He moved the pen over the paper, then checked his phone, then checked it again, just to make sure he hadn't missed anything. Time passed, but nothing was getting done. He thought, I'll start in a minute, or maybe after lunch. The cycle of procrastination continued. Sound familiar? We've all been there, caught in the grip of procrastination. It's easy to push things off, to convince ourselves that we'll be more motivated later, but in reality, procrastination only brings frustration. It's a clever trick our minds play on us. We tell ourselves we'll be ready to start soon, but that soon never comes. Instead, we remain stuck in inaction, watching time slip away. Why is it so hard to just get started? The Stoics understood this battle with procrastination well. In fact, they believed that one of the keys to living a fulfilled life was mastering the art of action, taking deliberate, focused steps toward our goals, no matter how small they may seem. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, reminds us, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. The Stoics understood that action begins with clarity. If something is important, then act on it. The longer we wait, the more we build mental resistance around it. Every delay just strengthens the cycle of avoidance. But how do we break free? A man may look at his tasks and feel overwhelmed by their size, unsure where to even begin. The key is to simplify. Instead of thinking about everything he needs to do, he can focus on one small action. Just one. Maybe it's sending that email or drafting a brief outline. It doesn't matter how small the task is. The point is to make a start. Once that first step is taken, it often leads to another, and suddenly, the momentum picks up. Inaction feeds on itself. The more we put things off, the harder they seem to get. But when we take that first step, we break the chain. It's like that feeling of triumph you get when you finally tackle that pile of laundry or clear off your desk. Once you start, you realize it wasn't as bad as you thought. In fact, it's often the anticipation of a task that makes it seem more daunting than it really is. What about those moments when we find ourselves paralyzed by the fear of not doing something perfectly? It's common to think that every task must be executed flawlessly, but the Stoics warned against perfectionism. Perfection is an illusion, and chasing it only leads to more delay. Instead, focus on progress, not perfection. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus teaches, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." This means that the key is in taking action, however imperfect, because it's through action that growth happens. Consider the woman who constantly tells herself she'll exercise later, or that she'll start eating healthy next week. That later never comes, and next week never arrives. But if she were to take just one small step, maybe a 10-minute walk or making one healthier choice, she might realize that starting is the hardest part. The rest she'll figure out as she goes. This is where the Stoic principle of focusing on what's within our control comes into play. We can't control everything, but we can control how we respond to the tasks before us. Instead of getting caught up in the fear of failing or the uncertainty of what's to come, we can focus on the here and now, the simple, deliberate action that leads us toward our goal. So when you find yourself staring at a long list of tasks, remember, start small, but start now. Even if it feels like a tiny step, it's progress. Each small action taken chips away at the mountain of tasks that seem so daunting. Ask yourself, what's holding you back from taking that first step? And how much better would you feel once you finally begin? The next time you find yourself procrastinating, think about the Stoic mindset. I cannot control everything, but I can control my actions. Will you let procrastination win, or will you take that first step toward progress today? Number 7. Neglecting physical and mental health, the foundation of self-worth. A woman had spent weeks immersed in work and daily responsibilities, pushing aside any thoughts of rest or self-care. She believed that her worth was defined by her productivity and that any time spent focusing on her physical or mental health was time wasted. But as the days went by, she began to feel drained, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Her energy was fading, her focus was slipping, and she couldn't help but wonder, was this really all there was? The Stoics believed that self-worth didn't come from external accomplishments alone. It came from the alignment of our actions with virtue and purpose. Yet many of us fall into the trap of neglecting one of the most essential foundations of self-worth, our physical and mental health. We push ourselves, day after day, believing that self-care is a luxury we can't afford. But in reality, neglecting our well-being leads us to a place where we can no longer function at our best. Can we really achieve our goals if we are running on empty? When we think of self-worth, we often think of our achievements, our careers, our accomplishments, the things we can show the world. But true self-worth goes beyond that. It's about recognizing that our well-being, our physical and mental health, directly impacts how we show up in the world. In fact, self-care isn't selfish, it's a necessary investment in our ability to give our best to others. Take the example of a man who spends long hours at the office, never making time for exercise or relaxation. Over time, he starts feeling fatigued, irritable, and disconnected from his loved ones. His once sharp focus begins to wane, and he finds it harder to keep up with his responsibilities. If we neglect our bodies and minds, we eventually find ourselves running on fumes, unable to do our best work or enjoy our lives. And then we wonder why we feel drained or stuck. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus put it simply, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. If we want to be the best versions of ourselves, whether in our careers, relationships, or personal pursuits, we must prioritize our physical and mental health. Without a solid foundation, nothing else can stand. It's not about achieving perfection, but about maintaining balance. Why do we so often neglect our well-being in favor of other obligations? Why is it that we put ourselves last, believing that we're being noble in doing so? The Stoics would remind us that our mind and body are not separate from our purpose. They are integral to it. Without physical and mental strength, we cannot do the work that truly matters. In fact, neglecting our health is a form of neglecting our duties to ourselves and the world around us. The solution lies in taking small, consistent steps. A man may feel overwhelmed by the idea of improving his health. Maybe he imagines that he needs to make drastic changes all at once. However, the Stoic approach teaches us that small, deliberate actions often lead to the greatest results. Instead of committing to an intense fitness routine he could start by walking for 20 minutes each day or setting aside a few minutes each morning to meditate. Slowly, over time, these actions build a foundation of well-being that supports everything else in his life. How often do we find ourselves saying, "I'll take care of myself tomorrow," only to let another day pass by without taking any action? The Stoics would argue that today is the only time we can control. Taking care of ourselves isn't a luxury, it's a responsibility, a commitment to our health, our work, and the people we care about. When we neglect our health, we are also neglecting the quality of the work we produce and the way we show up for others. Think about it. If you've ever tried to get through the day when you're exhausted or stressed, you know how difficult it is to focus, be productive, or even enjoy the simple pleasures in life. So, why would we continue to ignore our physical and mental health when doing so only makes everything else harder? Wouldn't it make more sense to care for our bodies and minds so we can truly thrive? So as you reflect on this, consider, are you taking care of yourself the way you deserve? How might your life change if you made your well-being a priority today, instead of waiting for tomorrow? In today's video, we've explored several crucial steps for safeguarding your confidence and building a healthier mindset. We talked about the power of protecting yourself from toxic relationships, transforming negative self-talk, finding focus amidst digital distractions, breaking the cycle of procrastination, and prioritizing your physical and mental health. Each of these lessons ties back to one essential idea: confidence and self-worth aren't something you gain overnight. They're built with consistent, small actions over time. Remember, it's not enough to just learn these concepts. It's about practicing them in your everyday life. By starting small, whether it's setting boundaries in toxic relationships or taking a few minutes each day for self-care, you can begin to see real, positive changes in how you feel and how you approach life. Every step you take in this direction builds a stronger, more resilient version of yourself. So, I want to ask, what's one thing you'll start doing today to protect your confidence and well-being? Whether it's saying no to a toxic situation or spending a few minutes on mindful breathing, every action counts. I'd love to hear about your personal journeys and any insights you've gained along the way. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Stoic Narratives Official for more empowering content. Together, let's continue this journey of growth and self-awareness.